Okay, so starting off, I think the first thing sort of mentioned is Silk Road. So, can someone explain to me what the Silk Road is? Yeah, Tim.
The Silk Road was the name of this giant trade route that stretched across Eurasia, which allowed a lot of cultures to trade goods and ideas.
Alright, so the main point right there is Eurasia, right? And then the connectivity, right? So we see that Europe, Asia, Middle East, Africa, all these are connected by this one trade route. We see that many different influencers interacting with one another, right? We have the Romans interacting with the Han, we see all these different places. You can also bring in Islamic exchange into it as well, because something that Professor Alvarez mentioned was that like the Muslims were bringing rice to Africa. We can see China ware and Zimbabwe, like he mentioned today, right? So think of this idea of like, when you think of Silk Road, think of connectivity, think of Eurasia, think of Africa, think of Middle East, think of people bringing things together. All right, what else? What else can we see? Other interpretations about Silk Road?
The Mongols empires released it.
Good. I'm not gonna write that down, but that is good. Like, if you think of different empires rolling over it, right? We have the Mongols, we have mainly in Asia, we have the Han, like I mentioned earlier, influence from the Islam when they took over. That one dude, what's his name? Timur, right? He wanted to rebuild Genghis Khan's influence, right? So that's another thing to think of, right? Think of all these ways the Silk Road has great importance and what could it bring? Cultural values, cultural beliefs, the shift, the spread, right? Everything's connected. Have the idea of connectivity. Okay. So sort of going off, let's talk about religion, and in this instance, Islam. What can y'all tell me about Islam from the lectures and the discussions we've had? What are the two types of Islam, do y'all know?
Sunni and Shia.
Right, so we have Sunni and Shia. And what was important about the Sunni and more like towards Sufism, right? What was that idea? Anybody know? We talked about? Yeah.
Sufism, they didn't have, was that the one where they didn't have the priest? I don't know what it's called.
The Caliphate?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
right? So we have, I think this is how you spell it. Let me double check. Yeah, that's how you spell it. All right, why is the Caliphate important?
It guides the followers in what's right and wrong in the religion.
Why is that important? I'm gonna warn you right now. I'm very, what's the word I'm looking for? Socratic in a sense. I like asking questions after question after question. So I will hammer you with questions to get to, because everything, you can explain more about everything. So just bear with me when I keep asking why. Okay, but yeah, why? Why do you think that's important? Why do you think guiding is important?
Because if everyone has individual beliefs, then everyone thinks differently.
So disorder, right? So disorder. And then where do you rely on? Why, like, what teachings would you rely on? If you want to tell them what's right, what is sort of your source material? And sort of this religion. Okay.
The 5 pillars.
5 pillars, where does that come from? It comes from the Quran, right? So we have the Quran. And that's why you teach people order. You teach people what's right and wrong. And now with the Quran and all these teachings, are they tolerant to other religions or are they intolerant? Why are they tolerant? You said it's part of their beliefs?
Yeah.
Why? Why was it part of their beliefs? Because it is a non-good answer. Why? Come on, Chris.
I know.
It was a Abrahamic language, and they saw Christians and Jews as not the same religion, but like brothers to them.
Right? People of the book. They see similarities in their religion. They see that we all have this general idea. So they eventually want to adapt you over time. They don't want to put these strict, harsh, you have to convert right now sort of law on them. They realize that, hey, if you see where we come from soon enough, you will believe in our ways. You will see that. So they're very tolerant to other religions. Okay. And then what was Islam a major religion of? Like what empire was Islam a major religion of? That's the question I'm gonna ask. Ottoman Empire, yes. Right? So we have the Ottomans. Going on this idea, were they intolerant or tolerant? Tolerant? Alright. And so we can relate back to this idea, right? Why were they tolerant? They wanted to wait. It was part of their religion, things like that. Think about that. Okay, other things about Ottoman Empire. What other things are there? Right, so they're tolerant to religions. What else?
Gunpowder.
Gunpowder. Right, the first gunpowder dynasty. So we have a good shift, right? We're going from religion now to military. What other sort of ideas about military can we see? What other militaristic powers? Yes.
The Janissaries.
The Janissaries. What are the Janissaries?
They're like an army, but they were like, they were usually like young Christian boys that were taken to be
Yes.
warriors.
Why were the young Christian boys taken?
They often had a better life as a janissary than they would in a family.
Yes, good. Right, they had better lives because they adapted and they had sort of the money and things like that. But going back just one step before the better life, why were the young Christians taken? Like there, I know Zal was talking about a reasoning. Anybody knows why?
Basically, like the human tax called, what was it, debt shivering?
Yes,
Is it debt shivering?
Yeah, it's Deshrin. Deshrin? Yeah, Deshrin. So, and can you explain what Deshrin is?
Remember correctly, it was kind of like a quota for certain towns and whatnot. You had to give up like this many boys of janissaries for them to get converted and trained and everything like that.
Yeah, so a tax of some sort, right? Tax. I'm gonna draw an arrow back to the young Christians, right? So you can see that it was these young boys that could use and build this military, right? And the Janissaries became the first structural military, right? So they had the advantage over everybody else because not everybody had that sort of order, and their military was all mercenaries. You couldn't rely on them. Mercenaries were there for the buck, where Janissaries there for serving their country, right? You see this pride, this nationalism, right, start to develop a little bit. What else? Anybody else have any thoughts about the Ottomans, gunpowders, military, Janissaries? Anybody?
They took over Constantinople.
Good. Constantinople, right? And you don't need to know the date, but it's in 1453. And what was important about Constantinople, right? So Constantinople was ruled by Europeans, right? Other religions, we see Christians, Jews, all them. And so kind of going back to this religious idea, did the Ottomans come in and strip them away of their opportunities, or did they give them more opportunities? Anybody have in their notes where it talks about the Ottomans with the merchants, right? The different merchants, the Jews, the Christians, right? How they gave them trading opportunities.
One of them made a painting of the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah. Just trying to focus on this. That's a good fact, but for later. Okay, so one thing that the Ottomans did when they took over Constantinople is they gave these opportunities to these different religious merchants. They didn't just strip them away, made them convert. They gave them the opportunity to still trade within the Ottoman Empire. They still gave them the opportunity to have free reign. They didn't want to completely strip that away, because going back to this idea we talking about with Islam, right? They had this tolerance to the other religions. They saw them as people of the book, right? Brothers of the book, this idea. So they were able to be tolerant to one another, right? So tolerated. Right, so they tolerated Christian and Jewish merchants. What else? Yeah, what's that?
Was it the Ottomans that like had a lot more protection for the Silk Road, and it was one of the safer times for the Silk Road?
Yes, right, so going to Timur, right? Protection of Silk Road. Timur, right? So, who can tell me about Timur? What was his idea? What was his goal?
Was he the one that wanted to be as big as Genghis Khan and continue his work?
Yeah, right. He was a descendant of Genghis Khan, so he wanted to rebuild his empire, and he wanted to expand and control over the Silk Road, because he saw how beneficial it was. And then what happened after he died?
Fell apart.
Did it?
It was split up between either his family or his generals.
It was his grandson.
Grandson? I thought it was grandson.
No, his grandson.
Uh,
Ulugh Beg, right? I don't know if y'all can see this, but Ulugh Beg. I will focus. Grandson. And what did his grandson do?
Made a giant sextant that was extremely accurate.
Yes. Good. Follow my arrows over here. Right? Giant sextant. What does that say about Ulugh Beg? Why was that important?
He was a real patronage of science, like a real patron of science.
Right, so we see sort of enlightenment / academic thinking. Right? That's at least my interpretation. Anybody else? What else can you interpret it from that?
Bless you.
What else? What other interpretations are there from the sextant?
I guess there's a real drive to know more about the world and wanting to figure out, like, geographically how things actually allied or like laid in place.
Perfect, right? So that's another interpretation of it. So this academic thinking, you want to expand more, you want to see more, you want to know more, right? So that can continue to this idea of Timur's sort of wanting to restore the Silk Road, right? See this idealized thinking, right? You have to think about higher level, yeah.
Was his grandson the one that knew all the languages, or was that someone
Yes,
else?
yes. Ulugh Beg knew the 5 languages. What were those 5 languages?
Arabic?
Yeah, that's one.
Turkic,
That's another.
Persian,
That's the other.
Mongolian,
That's another.
a little Chinese.
And that is the last one. Perfect. right? So he knew 5 languages. Going back to this academic thinking, right? He had this idea, he wanted to expand more. But what does that say about the Ottoman Empire, right? They promoted academics. They promoted this idea of wanting to learn more and wanting to have more, like, understanding of the world, understanding how things connect. Okay. Trying to find a good transition point now. I feel like we've talked. Anybody else? Any other questions, thoughts, concerns about? Yeah.
I don't know if there's like more of a fun fact, but like Doc Alvarez talked about it because he thought it was kind of ironic. I think, was it under Timur that, what was it, Henry Castile tried like forming an alliance with him, but the poor guy died before they could actually kick it off. That's
Yes.
more of a fun fact.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so actually, Timur was not part of the Ottomans. Timur was the Islam. Oh, I made a mistake. All right. So what we're gonna do is, okay, so all of this is Ottomans. All of this will categorize under Islam, right? Timur was not part of the Ottomans. Thank you for that correction. I misspoke. Yes, Timur was Muslim, and you're right. Henry III of Castile sent sort of an embassy to help recruit Timur to defeat the Ottomans, right? The problem, the Ottomans being great strength, and they control the Silk Road, right? So going like you said about the protection of the Silk Road, yes, that is good for the Ottomans as well, but mainly that's more of Timur, right? So think of that more as Timur with protection of the Silk Road and reestablishing the Silk Road. Timur, of course, the embassy to recruit to defeat the Ottomans, like this powerful empire. Yeah, everything else was good. Okay. I'm sorry, I should have came more prepared. I was a little running late behind, so. What was Timur's capital? Anybody know? Of his land. I think that's where I messed up. I didn't include this.
Samarkand.
Yeah, Samarkand, right? So going back over here, I gotta erase some stuff. Samarkand was Timur's land. Promote everything, want to control over everything, restore, rebuild. Okay. I know this is very confusing. I got confused and everything, so I apologize. But we're about to make a draft shift now. So we're still going to talk about sort of Islam and trade and all that. But now let's think of it more from a European perspective for a second. How many of you remember about Venice? What can you tell me about Venice? And important, and like in relation to all this.
Wealthy by trade, cooperation.
Trade and cooperation, right? So we're going back to this idea of trade and sort of the Silk Road. But then what was important? Why were Venice important? What were they starting to do?
Align with the islands.
They did, and why?
They're a trading city.
Trading city, all right. What were they looking for? What was valuable to trading with the Ottomans? What did the Ottomans have access to that Venice didn't have access to? Okay, gunpowder, some goods. Well, where do those goods travel along? That's more what we're lines I'm getting at. The Silk Road, maybe, right? Is that what you're gonna say?
No, the waterways.
Okay, they had waterways to trade throughout Venice, right? But Venice needed access to the Silk Road, yeah?
Didn't they need a lot of glass?
That's something, right? So these materials, where can they get these materials? It comes from the Silk Road, right? Ottomans had access to the Silk Road, so Venice then wanted to form that alliance with the Ottomans so they can then trade, right? So they had that trade with everybody. You can keep trading and going and then getting the materials they need, but you needed that alliance with the Ottomans. But then what happens when sort of relations starts getting iffy a bit, right? A lot of European nations can't go through Ottoman Empire, the Islam territory. Where do you go then? Yeah.
You have Venice be your middleman, basically.
That's one thing.
Facilitate trade between east and west in a kind of neutral manner.
Yeah, that is one thing, but what else? Right, so you have a middleman, but what if you don't want to use the middleman? What do you do?
Look for other ways.
And what are those ways?
Travel, they have did they have a name?
Venice? I don't think so. I think it's too small, but you're on the right track though. They use maritime routes, right? They start traveling through what's the one thing that's in between the Red Sea. Right? They travel the Red Sea. They go that way, right? They go to India down that way. Go down this Cape of Africa. They go left. What happens when they go left? What do they discover? They travel the Atlantic. America, right? You start forming the colonies, things like that. So that was a byproduct of sort of the Ottoman Empire and its rule, and then Europeans sort of retaliation against that, right? They didn't want to have to go through that middleman like you were talking about, Cain. They wanted to find new routes. So they traveled to new places, try to discover new routes, things like that. I know I am all over the place and I apologize, but we're about to make another drastic shift. Because I have notes of like talking points and things like that, but now looking back at it, I realized I put them all over the place, and I was like, I have no clear flow of transitions, and so like I was trying to put so much with the Ottoman Empire because I realized, and like I made the mistake with Timor, and I was like, oh my god, maybe I should just focus on like actually getting everything down right this time. Okay, so let's go back to Islam for a second, right? Sort of religion and all that. And what was one idea about the importance of the tale of Sinbad? What do you gain from that, right? First of all, before we start, what is the tale of Sinbad? What was the tale of Sinbad? What were some highlights of it? What was the importance of it? Yeah, Leah.
It was very similar to the tale of Gilgamesh in that it showed a hero like overcoming stuff and portraying ideals that were considered good and evil at the same time.
That's good, right? We see the resemblance, like you were talking about, to sort of ancient European sort of philosophies, ideologies, right? You have a hero, and what does this hero do, right? You mentioned good philosophy, like what is he doing? Like promote this idea. What is Sinbad? First of all, I think let's start there. What is Sinbad? Yeah.
He was a sailor.
Sailor slash merchant, right? Hero, sailor slash merchant. And how were merchants viewed in sort of the Islamic world? Yeah.
Sorry, what do you mean?
I was just gonna say they were viewed positively because they could make their own wealth.
Positively, right? What was that last part you said?
They could make their own wealth.
Make their own wealth, right? And what was the big idea? And sort of like Chris, when you mentioned the 5 pillars, what was one of the big ideas if you had wealth? What do you do?
You gotta be charitable with it.
Charitable, right? And so this whole idea of Sinbad is that idea, one of those pillars, is being charitable, right? So it's okay, so it was because he had the wealth, he was able to give charity, right? That was the whole idea of it, and follow these Islamic traditions, right? But then what was the benefit to showing that, displaying that, or telling this story? Anybody? Like, what was the benefit of like keep telling the story? Like, when this story was told, why would it be important to tell? Yeah.
I have in my notes, I don't know if it's right, but it was how it's important to live this life.
That's one thing, right? One way is that they valued merchants, right? They valued sort of trade, and that goes back to what it was around them, the Silk Road, and this expansion of all these different things, right? So like when you look at this, everything connects to the Silk Road essentially, and this topic we're talking about. A lot of the ideas come to the Silk Road and things like related to it. So like, and a lot of the questions think about the spread of ideas, spread of trade, spread of wealth, that type of thing. And what this tale of Sinbad does is express not only Islamic values, right? One being charity and giving charity, he had the means to do so, so he's going to, but also think about it as the spread of ideas, right? This is something that they told in coffee shops and houses, right? While they were sipping their tea and all that. How did they get the tea? Because of the merchant giving it to them through this trade routes, right? What is he telling? A story about their beliefs, right? So they're spreading the goods and they're spreading the beliefs, and that was the importance of this, right? This tale of Sinbad is it shows those connections of ideas and actual processes, right? The process being the trading on the Silk Road, right? So to highlight that, I guess trade of goods and beliefs. And this arrow basically means why it was important. All right, any questions about that? Any comments, concerns, ideologies? Okay, so we talked about I guess let's talk more about Muslim influence in the Iberian Peninsula. Woo! Okay, so I know if you were in 151, you should learn, and I know Professor Alves touched on a little bit, sort of the basic of how Muslims had influence in the Iberian Peninsula, right? 600, 700 time frame. They, the Muslims sort of conquered all of northern Africa, started going up into the southern part of Spain, right? They were fighting, they conquered it for a while. Then now we get into more modern times. By modern, I mean like what we were learning in the 1400s. We see the combination of the sort of the elites, right? We have, so let's say, combination of, what are the two elitist families that combined?
Aragon and Castile.
Right, yep. And who were the famous monarchs in each one?
Ferdinand and Isabella.
Which one was which?
Isabella was Aragon, and who was Castile?
His name was Henry of Castile. No, it's Ferdinand, right?
No, yeah, Ferdinand.
Wait, who's
Ferdinand is
Aragon was
Aragon.
Aragon was
Isabella is Castile.
Barcelona, and that's how he got Naples. Because
Is there
Aragon
also
was
a
facing
Who's
Naples.
Henry?
There's a Henry. in
No,
Castile.
Henry was.
Henry's the son.
Yeah, Henry's.
Henry's the son of Ferdinand and Isabel.
I'm drawing a family tree.
Okay.
Trust me, it's gonna get way more confusing, man.
I can touch on that later, but let's focus on Ferdinand and Aragon, or Ferdinand and Aragon. Ferdinand and Isabel for right now, right? So Aragon is Ferd. I'm gonna put Ferd, and then Castile is Bella. I can finish Ferd.
FERDINAND.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you. All right, so we have the combination of sort of these elites, right? Ferdinand and Isabel. What was that? You had something?
Can you just explain the family really quick?
I think it's yeah.
I'm mixing up
Henry
Henry
was
for-
like king of Castile. No, Henry was the great-great-grandfather
Yeah.
who actually made the overture to Timur when he was in charge of
Yes,
Castile.
you're right. Sorry, but isn't there a Henry?
There wasn't any. That
There's
was their
that's a
son.
Henry.
Henry's, I think.
That's a Henry the Third, and this one is Henry the Fourth of Castile dies in 1474.
Yeah, Henry the Fifth ended up making the Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah,
Right.
and then Henry IV was the grandson.
Yeah.
Henry III was the one with Timur when he tried to have the embassy,
Yeah.
like we talked about. All right, so
My
it goes
bad.
Henry, Ferdinand, and Isabel. The other Henry, Holy Roman Emperor Henry. If that makes sense. Okay.
Sorry, I should have said like Henry the Third.
Yeah. So Henry III, Ferdinand, Isabel, Henry IV, Henry V. Okay. So what was valuable or not valuable? Right. It's been a rough day. What was important about them coming together, right? Why did they come together?
It unified their country,
So unified, right? We see the unification.
but they each still like ruled over their respective countries.
Yes.
Like they were allies, but it was still separate.
Right, that's very important. I want you to put like a star or something about that when we talk about this, right? They each had their own, they still had their own power, right? Think of it like a prenup, right? They were like, you're not getting in my wealth. I'm keeping all of this. This is mine. No touchies for you. We're doing this, but we're going to come together. We're going to fight together. And then Henry IV came and combined Castile and Aragon, right? So that's where you can get that. And then Henry V, like going back to what we were talking about, right? But we see that they merged they merged the kingdoms. What else? And then where was all the money at in the kingdom though? Right? And once they merged, who had all the power technically? Aragon, right? Because of what?
Barcelona.
Right? So Aragon had the wealth through Barcelona. Right, so Aragon had the wealth through Barcelona, and what did Barcelona do to have that wealth in the first place? What was Barcelona?
Weren't they the sheep herders? Or were they-
No, that's Castile.
That was their wealth with the Hist and everything like that. But what they did, they basically applied the Mediterranean on their side, and which is how they ended up taking over southern Italy from Naples.
Yep, they were sort of a powerhouse of like a maritime routes, like you're talking about. They had they had a large influence with trade, Mediterranean, like everything like Kane was saying. And then where did Isabella get her funds from? Why did she need to get funds, right? Leah mentioned that they were sheep herders, right? So they weren't very wealthy compared to Ferdinand and Aragon, who had Barcelona. So what did Isabella have to do to gain some wealth? I'll give you a hint, 1492. Right? Who came up with an offer, a proposal to explore more lands for a new maritime route? Christopher Columbus. He went to Isabella, who was in Castile, and it was sort of like a get-rich-quick scheme, right? Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Who knows? I have no money. I'm kind of poor compared to my husband. Let me do something, right? So it was a last-ditch effort to find something. And that was a result of sort of Muslims controlling this sort of Middle Eastern trade routes, the Mediterranean in some parts, and they didn't want to trade with them. So they were looking for other ways. So Isabella funded this expedition by Christopher Columbus, and then boom, happens to discover the I can't speak today. The front part of the colonies, all that, the islands, Bahamas, woo. Yeah. Anybody else had any other thing to say about Ferdinand and Isabella?
That's also where Spain actually started to become, swing from religiously tolerant to exceptionally intolerant.
Yes. Good point, right? So we start seeing a switch from tolerance to intolerance. Right? Why was that important? What was that called? What are some ideas attached to it? I know these are very open-ended questions, but any comments?
The Spanish Inquisition started.
Spanish Inquisition started, right? Going from this, we have the Inquisition, that's one thing. Alright, and everybody here knows the Inquisition, I assume. Do I need to go over it? Everybody's good? Okay, yeah.
It led to the expulsion of Jews and Muslims from the Iberian Peninsula.
Yes! Led to the expulsion of Jews and Muslims. What group went first?
Jews.
What group went second?
Muslims.
Alright, right, so we have the Jews going first and the Muslims And what was the name of that, right?
For the Jews, they were called the conversos. right?
Yes, conversos.
The Jewish converts, and what, and the Moriscos for the Muslims, because they're called the Moors.
Draw this line right here. All right. Right, so we have this thing is that you basically convert or you get kicked out, right? And we saw with the Jews, a lot of them moved. I know Professor Alva's mentioned, or wasn't it Israel, right, that took up a lot of the refugees, right? Same thing with the Muslims. Convert, get kicked out, right? Even though they had an agreement that, hey, you guys can stay here, we'll be tolerant of your religion, and then boom, they still get kicked out in what was like 1523 or whatever the date was. But yes, that was a good point. Let's see what else. Anybody else? While I'm still looking, anybody have any points they want to touch on? Something they're still confused about? Yeah.
When and how did Portugal form? Like, is that related to any of this? Okay, I didn't know if that was like.
We never really talked about it, did we?
No,
I have somewhere written in here that Portugal something, and then I just stopped writing.
what part was it in?
They were separate kingdoms, that's right. They were separate kingdoms.
Yeah.
Yeah, we not even.
How did we get from the Ottoman Empire to
Timor.
Ferdinand and Isabella? Like, how did that transition?
Yeah, that was a sloppy transition. That's what that was.
Oh. And don't forget the Reconquista. That was what it was called. Like when they took back all the land.
Yes. Thank you.
The title. Yeah, the Reconquista.
Yeah, not Inquisition. Sorry. You know what? Thank you,
Well, I mean,
Ken.
well, it's fun, like after it, so it's tied to it.
They're already at the couch.
All I wrote here was Kingdom of Portugal forms, and there's nothing else.
I think.
In 1100, I wrote that too.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the exact same thing.
Yeah,
I didn't write
that's
1100,
that's
but I
not
wrote
important.
Kingdom
I
of
don't
Portugal
know.
forms.
Yeah, I don't.
Find it.
That's, I wouldn't say that's
I don't
important.
know, I just remember seeing it on the screen, so I wrote it.
Um,
I'm trying to remember. I think like they got married out or something like that. I can't remember.
probably that makes sense.
I think we saw the gold digger.
Henry was his son.
Okay. I'm sorry I looked at you and asked that question because it was.
Any other points? I think because we talked about Islam. We talked about the Silk Road. We talked about the Ottomans. We talked about Timor. We talked about Samarkand. We talked about Ferdinand. We talked about Isabel. We talked about Destrim. We talked about the Janissaries. We talked about Venice with the trade with Muslims. Didn't want to do that. We talked about the Tale of Sinbad. Talked about Ferdinand and Isabella. Talked about the coffee houses. We talked about Islam traveling the Silk Road. Talked about that. We talked about Columbus.
Coffee houses.
Yeah, it's just. Oh, one more thing. Don't
Yeah.
forget, the Portuguese had the Caravel, that really cool ship that they made.
I don't think that's important.
That's probably not. I don't know. I don't know what else I'm forgetting.
Are we supposed, like, there's also, I have it under my notes of like 1492 that the first bishop wanted to gradually convert Muslims
The Bishop of
and
Granada.
learned Arabic for gradual conversion?
Yeah, so that first bishop wanted to do that, right? So that was sort of adopting this Muslim or Islamic tradition, right? How they generally converted someone over time. So it was like why the Islams were so comfortable with allowing people to be, or had this tolerance for people to be like of people to book. They're like, soon you're gonna convert, right? And so that first bishop wanted to follow that same suit, right? It was like, well, your people do it, so let's do it to you and see, you can see the benefits of this. But then eventually he was outcasted, right? Because they were, right, was, maybe I think, no, he was
It
outcasted.
said he was seen as too friendly after Isabella's
Yeah,
death.
right. So he was outcasted because of this idea, because they wanted to completely get rid of it, because they like Christianity and this idea of, or was it Christianity at this time? Catholicism, right? Was this, you had to believe our way right here, right now, right? You had to do this, right? So by him being friendly, it's like, whoa, you're an enemy to our religion now, because we're not supposed to be friendly with them. We're supposed to have this one way. Let's follow this one way. Let's keep doing this. And you're doing something completely different, so that's why he's outcast.
Even though the bishop found all these similarities within both.
Exactly, right? Because that's why those similarities that Islamic people can see, right? The people of the book, they understand it, they appreciate it. They're like, oh, we can relate to this in a sense. We see everything connecting. But then you have this idea, this like strict Machiavellian sort of ideology in a sense, right? It was like, we need power, authority, rule. Right now, you can't go against it. So yeah, that's for that. Last thing on my list is sort of talking about what we went over today with Africa and all of that. Anybody have any thoughts about Islam, Silk Road, Ottoman Empire, any of that still?
I have a name written down, but nothing with it. I don't know if it's important or not. It's Jalal al-Din Muhammad from 1200 to 1273. I don't know if that name means anything. I just have his name written down.
Let me see.
Is that near like the beginning of our notes?
Yeah, like one of the first things we talked about. Jalal al-Din Muhammad Rumi, I think.
Oh,
He
Rumi?
was born in
1207.
Tajikistan and died in Turkey.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's
that,
all I,
nothing else.
that's all I have.
I didn't know if there was anything I missed and it was important for whatever.
I don't know.
So, we talked about it earlier. I didn't say his name. But you remember when I first started talking about Islam and like Sufism and all that? One of the things was Rumi. He was one of those people, and he had that intolerance, or that tolerance for the religious people. So that's what he was, very tolerant to all these different religions. So that is important. So Rumi is someone you should take note of, but relate that to the first thing we talked about with Islam. I just didn't mention his name, but I talked about everything he did. Yes.
Can you repeat what you just said?
Okay, so what he mentioned, he said,
Rumi?
yeah, Rumi. That first thing I talked about when I talked about Islam and like the tolerance they had for other religions, he was one of the rulers that imposed that ideology. I'm just trying to look in my notes to see if I see like the specific. Yeah. I don't have it in my notes. It doesn't look like it. So, which I probably should change that. Yeah. But yeah, that's basically the first thing I talked about with Rumi and that. I don't have the specific on that, so, but it's basically what I mentioned earlier. Okay. So let's talk about what we talked about today with Africa and stuff. What are some major points from today?
Coptic Orthodox Christianity.
Yes, that is a big one. Why is that important?
It's basically one of the oldest variations of Christianity, and it was basically the state religion of Ethiopia.
Okay, so we have Okay, what else? What else can you tell me about it?
They had a very interesting foundation myth. You have the idea of Queen Makeda, who was checking up with King Solomon of the Israelites.
Yeah.
And basically before Judea got sacked and whatnot, she allegedly brought back the Ark of the Covenant itself and placed it somewhere within Ethiopia, while also teaching the idea of monotheism, aka one God to Ethiopia. And to that end, there was a strong Jewish presence within Ethiopia as well. Oh, also, it says they have the largest Bible ever, and they stem from the Egyptian tradition. What is that?
Queen. It's Madeka, right?
Makeda.
I mean, you basically summed it up perfectly. That's everything I would say about that.
Thanks.
Yeah, this is the main points you want to take away from that. Now, the one thing I will say about this though, the Coptic Orthodoxy, is that still their religion today? You guys remember what he said about that? Because there was a brief moment where there was some imperialists, right, and different ideas, different religions came to influence them. So then,
Didn't they overthrow them? Like they converted, the imperialists converted one of the kings to Catholicism, and the people didn't like it, so they overthrew him.
yes,
And I think they're still following
Coptic Orthodoxy. Yep,
today.
that's perfect. So they were converted at one point, then they overthrew. So I'll write it down. So converted to Roman Catholicism. Then overthrew. And right, overthrew and reverted back to Coptic Orthodoxy. That's the main point. That's the main takeaway I would take from that. What about the Malian Empire? Right, the Malian Empire, Malian. I don't know why I said it like that. What are some things that you can take away from that?
Their capital of Timbuktu possessed a massive amount of Arabic writing.
Yeah.
It's a UNESCO heritage site, and they were absolutely loaded with gold and salt and such.
Yeah.
And were very valuable in kind of the Saharan trade routes because of that.
Yeah.
I don't think he said it, but Mansa Musa was, and probably is the richest person to be alive.
In the world, yeah, that's a good point to address. But what about sort of that? You can tell me a little bit about the folk tale sort of that they had, the Sundiata. What was important of that? Right, so let me write that down. Cool. Mali. What was important of that? What did that highlight? What were major things? I never got your name. What was your name?
Brady.
Brady. Okay.
There was the power of the Queen Mother. There was a lot of significant female roles.
Right? So you have significant influence from women at this time, right? With the Queen Mother, talked about all of that. And then we see the other ideas that he mentioned that like from Europe and they gain, or like those, or not Europe, the other things where you mentioned like everybody has like the sister who's the magician or whatever, the
Voodoo priestess.
yeah, right, all those ideas that women have this powerful role as sort of an advisor. You talked about Black Panther, right, with the Queen Mother, all that, right? These had this powerful influence over these sort of politics at this time. So I would take away that from that. Yeah, you have a question?
Oh no, sorry.
What's your name again?
Lindley.
Lillian, okay. I'm trying to remember everybody's name. Yeah,
Wasn't it this time, like, I know at some point around here we discussed how there was still like a patriarchy and like it had, like you basically had to have like a men's approval to still be in
Yes.
those positions of power.
yes, still had to have. Still had to have men's approval, right? It was like this many people believe in this person, and right, you can see the talent. He focused a lot on this idea of talent. You had to be talented in order to gain some of these high positions and all these things of that. That was a great point. Thank you for that. Trying to see. We go a little faster. We're running out of time, but I think.
I think that's all we covered today.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
And how the major point I would take away from Zimbabwe, you know how you mentioned how there was fine china down there, right? So that highlights Zimbabwe was connected to sort of trade and these trade routes. So you can see Islamic influence from the Islamic exchange. You see all these ideas coming through the trade, beliefs. We see the beliefs of all that. So the main thing, like the main takeaways I would take from everything is see how everything's connected. Right, so you see how the Silk Road, the Ottomans, the Islamic exchange, Ferdinand and Isabella, right? All of these things are connected, and then also connects into Africa. Another thing to mention about Africa, make sure you focus on sort of like some of the geographical aspects of it, right? We mentioned there's 5 different climate zones, right? Tropical zones, and he talks about each zone. Look a little bit into that. We're running out of time, so I'm not going to go deep into that. But that's something to remember, because that also influences a lot of things as well. Because he mentions how there's people, foragers in the jungle. They live better because they had access to all these resources than people in the deserts. That was another thing to look at. But yeah, that is all I have planned. Sorry for being so sporadic. I was not as well prepared as I should have been. But any questions, comments, concerns? Yeah, Brady.
Will you be doing these often?
Yeah, my plan is to hold one once a week for primary sources, because I know you guys, some of you may not be introduced to primary source yet, so I want to give a good introduction to that because I feel like it's a vital skill. So that would be once a week. So if you wanted to go into that, but for the quizzes, it's always going to be like the day before the quiz, or like the scheduled day before the quiz, not like the actual calendar day. So if you want to go back into the calendar and all that, or you know what I mean. Yeah. That's all I have.